Kia ora everyone, nā mai haere mai. Welcome to the webinar on seabed mining. We're just going to give it a minute for all of us to join the call. And in the meantime, welcoming everybody to the space and introducing our co-hosts, just saying that ECO is co-hosting this webinar with Greenpeace, Legacy, Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and KASM, that is Kiwis Against Seabed Mining. Thank you all for being here, and we are going to start shortly. And before that, just a few notes on the engagement of the session. Please use the chat box for engaging, introducing yourself, and having any comments and thoughts on the session. Please make sure you input it there. And any questions that need to be answered, please input them in the Q&A box below, and we will take it off then. On your screens now, you will be seeing a few of the images that are shared from all of our co-hosts, and just showcasing you some of the beautiful creatures on our oceans and how we need to protect them. Handing over now to our introducer, Barry or Kath.
Kia ora tātou. So we just okay, kia ora. Okay, Mari oho, Mari tu, Mari ora, ki te tātou, hu mai e, hui e, tā ki e. So, introduction, parakia. No mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui hunga o ECO, ko Barry Weber, tāku ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, everyone. We've got most of our speakers present. We're just waiting for Debbie Nariwa Paka, who will be here shortly. But I just give a bit of background. ECO and its co-hosts is organising with Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, the Kiwis Against Seabed Mining, and Greenpeace, with our colleagues from Legacy, and acknowledging the work that Te Pāti Māori have done, and the work that Debbie and her iwi mana whenua Ngāti Ruanui have worked on this issue in terms of seabed mining over the last decade or so. So, and this is a really important issue at this time, and I'm sure other speakers will remind you that there's a couple of petitions going on, and I'll do a brief introduction to the first speaker we've got is Phil McCabe, who has a long history involvement in the issue of seabed mining. Phil was the leader of Kiwis Against Seabed Mining, and was involved in the long history in the Trans-Tasman seabed mining proposal in the Taranaki, South Taranaki area. So with that introduction, and we need to move on, I will pass on to Phil to start the speakers. Thanks, Phil.
Kia ora, Barry. Tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, ECO, for pulling this conversation together. And it's an honour and a privilege to be here on the panel with these amazing folks who have all put in huge amounts of time, energy, and expertise in defending our ocean from the proposed seabed mining in New Zealand. Aotearoa, New Zealand's an island nation full of coastal people, and in the waters that surround our islands, there lies things that can be considered economic resources. And in that light, I can understand early proponents wanting to explore the opportunity, the economic opportunity that those resources present. So I can understand the early thinking, but through the process, it's been quite a journey. As soon as the door was open in 2005 under the Labor government, commercial interest came in hard and fast. But just as quick as that commercial interest came in, there was immediate opposition. And the difference between the commercial interest and the opposition is the companies were made up of few individuals seeking profit, and today they are all but gone. There's very little commercial interest remaining in New Zealand. The defenders, on the other hand, are many and varied from multiple different backgrounds spread across the motu, and we are all still here and as strong and committed as ever. The pain that has been inflicted over 17 years of defending against this proposed activity is deep and profound. And after almost 10 years of very detailed scrutiny through legal processes and testing the activity against the standards that were frankly set by a pro-mining government, the National Party, back in 2013 with the EEZ and ECS legislation. The tests have shown that it's basically we've ended up where we as the defenders began, in the knowledge that this activity cannot go ahead without causing significant harm, and it is frankly environmentally inappropriate in a 21st century world, and that socially and culturally it is unacceptable to the people of New Zealand. So in that light, this far down the track, we've come full circle, and we all on this panel believe it's time to wind this up, shut the door, throw away the key, and ban the activity in our waters. So with that, we've got a range of panelists. Firstly, I'll introduce Debbie Ngarewa-Paka. Is Debbie online yet? No, Debbie's not here yet, sorry. So we've got Cindy Baxter, who's the chair of KASM, who's held that position for the last few years and engaged and supported KASM's work as a committee member for many years before that, for the last decade. We've got Scott McIndoe from Legacy, representing recreational fishers across New Zealand who have opposed this activity. Duncan Curry's a legal representative through the 3 EPA cases and court cases that followed for KASM and Greenpeace, and then James Hita of Greenpeace Aotearoa, who is doing great work on the issue. So while we're waiting for Debbie to join us, first I'd like to invite Cindy to take the floor. Kia ora.
Thanks, Phil.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Cindy Baxter, tōku ingoa. I live in Piha. I live on a black sand beach, so which was the thing that got me into the seabed mining issue in the very first place. So I'm just going to take you through just the basic. Oh, sorry about the dog. The basics of seabed mining. If we could start the slideshow, Aisha. Basically, KASM has been working since the get-go, really, with a coalition. We are members of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. We are also members of ECO, which we've been from quite early on. But we've been, is that the purple? Yeah, great, thank you. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, we've, when we first began in the history of KASM really is, goes back to 2004 when we had the foreshore and seabed Act that came in from by Labor, and everybody was like, right, it's clear that you know, that's going to open up for seabed mining, and the companies started looking around and talking about it. So KASM formed in 2005. And between then and 2012, 2013, when the first application came in, there was a huge amount of work going up and down the west coast of the North Island, getting all the tiny little communities who had relationships with the coast up to speed with with the potential for seabed mining. It was a very it was a number of years that that KASM was involved in doing this. There was we got on board the fishers, the recreational fishers who were with us from the very beginning. We also got there was surf clubs, all sorts of people all had a relationship with the sea. In 2011, the national government set up the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, and that was soon followed by, as Phil said, the Exclusive Economic Zone Continental Shelf Act, which was basically would require a marine discharge permit consent from the EPA. So things really started heating up at that point. So this image here, sorry about the dog, this image here shows the permits right down the side of, right around the country that existed in 2012. There's a huge number. There was, I live up in Piha. We had, I think Rio Tinto had a mining permit off our coastline. New Zealand MB just went ahead and gave these mining permits out to everybody, well, these exploration permits out to all these companies. There were a range of companies. You can see the extent and breadth of the potential problem that we had. Next slide. So I'm just going to go into what seabed mining is. Basically, it's this is the issue with certainly in Aotearoa, where you've got these big ships up the top, which basically the dredge ship would basically excavate the seabed, take the iron sands up to the ship, and then they would be processed on the ship where the iron gets magnetically separated from the sand, and then basically they just dump the rest of it down back onto the seabed. Now, the Trans-Tasman Resources project, basically their first application came in 2013, I think it was, and they basically, their application was to take 50 million tons of sand of the seabed a year, and take 5% of that would be the iron sand. So, and then they dump 45 million tons back down onto the seabed, and this would go on for 35 years. So that's 50 million tons a year. I know I had one TV show news program got confused, and they just thought it was a total of 50 million tons. This is 50 million tons a year, and this is from and this would be in a 66 square kilometre a section of the South Taranaki Bight, which was so that was it was pretty scary actually. So this is what seabed mining is. If we go to the next slide, I think basically I'm just going to take you through some of the applications, but meanwhile I'll talk about what's out there. Is as we were going through all these processes, there was this research going on from this researcher who discovered that we actually have our genetically distinct blue whale population in the South Taranaki Bight. So we first had the Trans-Tasman Resources application went in. Basically, we managed to get a record number of submissions against this. It was about 4,500 or something. It was a record number of submissions the EPA had ever had, and the EPA had a 5-person panel that decided unanimously to reject the application. So we saw off that first consent. Then came in the Chatham Rock Phosphate, who were they wanted to mine phosphate off the deep seabed of the 1,500 meters deep off the Chatham Rise, which is off the east coast of well, it was near the Chatham Islands. And this would have, destroyed thousands of years old coral and all the rest of it. And basically we saw that off as well. That was a very, very clear decision. Duncan Curry will be talking about the detail of some of those decisions in his presentation later. Sorry about the talk. So next up, and then basically what happened next, and what happened next was that we had then we had TTR come back again, Trans-Tasman Resources. They didn't do anything really. They were told to have a 2-year to go away and actually gather data about what was on the seabed, because they didn't even know. They hadn't even done that work. They came back having not done that work. They had some new modeling about this is the other issue with seabed mining, is that there's a big plume of, when you dump all that stuff back down onto the seabed, it creates a plume of sediment in the water column. And it was very, very unclear, and we still don't know how much and how far that plume would go, but it could go right across the South Taranaki Bight as the mining goes on, and that would create huge disruption for the benthic community out there. So Trans-Tasman Resources, they didn't, basically what they did was they lobbied the government to change legislation to make it easier for them to get it through. So anyway, we got an even bigger number of submissions this time, especially with the help of Greenpeace and Forest and Bird and Eco and Legacy and all the different groups that we've been involved with. And there were 13,000 submissions against it this time. It was absolutely massive. But in 2017, the EPA said yes to that. They gave the green light to it. They had a 4-person panel this time, and it was chaired by a pro-business person, and he had the casting vote. 2 of the members, a scientist and a Māori cultural expert, both were a very hard no, but he had the casting vote and put it through. So we took it to the High Court and we won. We took it, and then the company appealed it to the Court of Appeal, and we won that. And then they appealed it again to the Supreme Court, and that hearing was in 2020. And then last year we won that. So there's a bit of a process now, because the Supreme Court said that we have to go back to that the EPA, if they want to, they sent it back to the EPA to look at. And so now, and they had to seek direction from the High Court as to how this whole thing should proceed. So that's where we are now, and there's going to be a court case on the 30th of May. But if we go forward a couple of slides there, this is the, on this, just, there's that red chunk there is a 635 square kilometre permit that Trans-Tasman Resources has right next to the darker bit you can see just to the left of it there. That's the 66 square kilometres. So if they get the consent across the line, which I doubt they will, because then Duncan will talk about the implications of the Supreme Court decision, well, they would go ahead and mine this massive area which is closer into shore, so they'd have to get a consent for that. So the fight is not over, but we feel as though the Supreme Court decision was a very, very clear decision, but yeah, it's still not over. I think we're still going to be tied up in court cases for the rest of our lives, it feels like. But since 2005 there still hasn't been any seabed mining in Aotearoa, and that's the way we want to keep it. And if you just go to the next slide, this is, we have now, we've got a petition up. We're now calling on Jacinda Ardern to ban seabed mining in Aotearoa. We've all had enough. We've been through so many applications. We've had 3 courts back us. And so it's time for a ban. And I'll put a link to that petition into the chat. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, Cindy. Have we got Debbie with us at the moment? No, okay. And welcome to all those people from far, from the Pacific, from the Atlantic, by the sound of it, and who are concerned and interested in the issues in regard to seabed mining. And thanks, Cindy, for putting the chat in the link. Sorry, putting the link in the chat to the petition on seabed mining. So the next speaker is Scott McIndoe from Legacy. Scott has a long history of working on recreational fishing issues, and Legacy was involved in promoting issues in regard to the against the TTR mining proposal, and has a long history of concern in this issue. So I'll pass it over to Scott. Kia ora, Scott.
Thank you, Barry. Eina mana, eina reo, ro rangatira ma, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having Legacy and the New Zealand Sport Fishing Council on the panel. I have to acknowledge KASM. I have to acknowledge the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, ECO. You guys, you inspire me and many of my colleagues. Your determination, your stamina, your refusal to blink. It's just fantastic. It's 2005. It's been 16, 17 long years of our sake. Thank you to my old mate, Tim Ranger, Malibu, Hamilton, right in there. Cindy and Phil, wow. So it's only your selflessness and your unswerving focus that allows us to be here today on the case of these miners who are never going to stop investing money as long as there's a slither of a chance of them exploiting this resource, this non-renewable resource. And it's a handful of deeply committed citizens like you guys that allow for us to have a slither of hope. So thank you. Legacy is the public outreach of the New Zealand Sport Fishing Council. And together with our close friends and national representative organisations, the New Zealand Angling and Casting Association, the New Zealand Underwater Association, and Yachting New Zealand, we make up a significant number of people who choose to belong to clubs and actually put their money where their mouths are. A slither of that money, of which has made its way into supporting your good work. And as I sit here reflecting and really thinking about the reality of this battle, it's time for us to put some more money on the table to KASM. It's critical. I'm not going to put you on the spot, Phil, but it would be quite good to know where that we are financially, because this battle is really costly, and you can count on some more support from us non-commercial, well, dare I say it, members of the public, heaven forbid. A rather irritating reality to have members of the public interfering with the serious business of exploiting non-renewable resources. Seabed mining, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's a violation. It's way beyond just simply destruction. It's totally inappropriate behavior. And it's not something that you rule out for small areas or push into the next door neighbor's paddock. It's a violation. It's not acceptable. It needs to be eliminated. It's just poor behavior. So total support from all of those aforementioned national representative organizations to ban this nonsense of destroying our sacred benthic environment. I can make that statement with total confidence of my colleagues backing that up. A personal statement, aged 64, a boomer, bit of a bottom feeding property parasite, not deeply proud of my innings here on planet Ocean, consuming happily away, although trying to minimize that. As far as I'm concerned, this is a totally inappropriate withdrawal from the bank of non-renewables. My generation, this generation, have had enough. We do not deserve to continue to strip mine and exploit every single possible resource non-renewable. Not okay. So I've got two angles here. Get off the bottom, leave the bottom alone, and leave something for our future generations. Let us not make the mistake of the industrial fishing machine who clumsily go about their business using a pretty bogan bloody strategy, discover and destroy. And that's a demonstrable statement. They do it over and over again. And when they've cleaned out one, they'll go a bit further offshore or go a bit deeper or figure out some clever technology to dredge the surf line to get some clams or whatever. It's just discover and destroy, and it leaves nothing left for those coming along later. And we're witnessing that as we speak with the nationwide closure of the entire scallop tipa fishery. Discovered, destroyed, dispatched, exported, just disgraceful. So I'll finish by simply repeating our deep appreciation for those dedicated people who are willing to commit to holding this line and seeing this grossly inappropriate behavior dispatched to the pavilion. Thank you for your time.
Kia ora, Scott, and thanks for your kind words. Have we got Debbie with us yet, or should we just move on to to Duncan Curry, who's an eminent international lawyer who's been involved in these high seas fishing and also mining issues, in this case with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and he's been involved in the 3 seabed mining applications in New Zealand. So I'll pass over to Duncan. Thanks, Duncan, for speaking. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry, and kia ora, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. I'm really picking up where Cindy began on the description of the 3 applications that have gone through the process to date, with a brief description of what the process has been and what it is. And I think, as Cindy said, there have been 3 applications to date. One initially for iron sand mining in the Taranaki Bight, and that was declined, then followed by the Chatham phosphate application, which is in 500 meters of water, so technically speaking it's deep sea mining, and then followed by the second application by TTR again for sand mining, for iron sand mining. So a brief description of the hearing process. And I think what I want to really highlight is that this is overall a pretty intensive and time-consuming, but also transparent process. First, the environmental impact assessment is notified, and there's a public submission application. Cindy talked about the number of submissions that were made in the last hearing. Then there's a hearing up to 40 days, and these are really considerable hearings where the applicants are allowed to bring their scientific experts, submitters, which included a wide range from iwi to the fishing industry to KASM and Greenpeace to other concerned organisations, who then bring their own experts and scientific experts. It's not formal cross-examination, but questions are asked of the witnesses, and the scientific experts go away and caucus and try to decide what they can agree on and what they can't agree on. And then there are legal submissions and so on, finally leading to a decision by the decision-making committee and going on to an appeal. And the reason, one thing I want to highlight there is 2 things really. One is the very, very considerable both expense and time by submitters right across the board. And as Cindy said, it's a cause of much frustration, and the really has put a disproportionate burden on the civil society. But also would like to emphasise that it is an open and transparent process. And the bottom line, with the exception of the third application, which Cindy talked about with Trans-Tasman Resources and having 4 decision makers with 1 having a casting vote, the bottom line was that the commissioners saw this and decided either there's just simply not enough information here, or really, the scientific information that we're hearing is that this will be just too damaging. And that's why the 2 initial applications were declined, and the third application was granted on the basis that the applicants would have 2 years to gather the information they hadn't gathered, and then that was overturned by the High Court, which was upheld by the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. So in contrast to international seabed mining in the area, which I think Phil will talk about briefly, this really is a process where independent science is able to be brought, where the public are able to make submissions, and there's an open and transparent process, and it has resulted in, again, decision makers saying, no, this is not acceptable. So I won't dwell on any of them because we don't have a lot of time, but to make the point that, again, in the Chatham Rise applications that he talked about, 26 hearing days, it would have destroyed deep sea coral. The phosphate would have contained uranium, and while a lot of claims are made that, oh, the phosphate's needed for New Zealand farms, in fact, evidence was that around about 80% would have been exported anyway. The application was in a so-called benthic protected area for fisheries, so that you had the irony where the area is protected from fishing, but would have actually been mined, and that marine mammals have been seen in the area, but there was no systematic study. And again, it was just declined on a number of bases. I've had to summarise here, but the short point is the destruction of the stony corals, which were potentially unique to the area, and the habitat would have been destroyed in its present form and would have been turned into soft sediments. And then there was also the return sediment plume, similar to the one Cindy talked about, and that this is something you see with all seabed mining applications to date, that there is a really significant return sediment plume, so not just the sediment plume from sediment being kicked up and destroyed and dispersed right near and on the seabed, but in fact that the material that is taken up to the processing ship is returned into the ocean in a different form, having been ground up and very likely to disperse itself over a much greater area, and again causing environmental effects such as smothering of organisms and so on. And just making one brief point, and that mitigation in that case was claimed. The applicants claimed that, oh, they're going to remedy some of the destruction of the seafloor by dropping concrete blocks, and which is frankly a ludicrous proposal. Evidence that KASM and Greenpeace brought from experts was that would require something like 164 million concrete blocks to remedy just 20% of the area, if it was effective, and scientific evidence is that it wouldn't be effective in any case. And frankly, that was the last we heard of any suggestion of mitigation. Cindy talked about blue whales and also Hector's dolphins, rather Maui dolphins in the EEZ area in the iron sand application, as little blue penguins and terns, all of which can be affected by the sediment plume in particular. And then just a brief look at the legislation. The EEZ and Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Act put into place, as Cindy said, by the national government in 2012. And a great deal of effort has been put into during the legal process, the High Court through to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, into what is the Act's purpose. And very clearly it's a dual purpose to both promote sustainable management of natural resources of the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, but also to protect the environment from pollution by regulating or prohibiting the discharge of harmful substances. We'll get into that, but the Supreme Court most recently placed a great deal of emphasis on this protection issue. That it does require that decision makers must take into account a list of relevant factors, and importantly, the information principles in section 61 do address uncertainty and adequacy of information, and specifically provide that if information is uncertain rather, or inadequate, the Environmental Protection Authority must favour caution and environmental protection. So the words precautionary principle, precautionary approaches are not used, but successive courts have ruled that that is in fact similar to the precautionary principle. And yeah, firstly, the Court of Appeal decision that first brought up this issue, saying that if there's a real prospect of material pollution of the environment, then a consent should not be granted. They said that two of the most commonly cited tools to justify consent, being economic trade-offs or subsequent remediation, can't be used. And they made it clear that the EPA must favour caution and environmental protection and apply the precautionary principle. And due to the way the legislation is drafted, an adaptive management approach cannot be used in this case either. And then moving to the Supreme Court of the, again, this is of the third application, the iron sand application. Importantly, the Supreme Court, whilst a very long decision with a number of different judgments, they were unanimous in saying there's a three-step test when assessing applications for marine discharge and dumping consents. So firstly, and I've paraphrased this here for simplicity, will there be no material harm caused by the discharge or the dumping? If yes, you then go to step C, which I'll get to, and if not, you go to step B. And step B is, can conditions be imposed to avoid material harm, mitigate it, etc., within a reasonable time frame? If not, the consent must be declined. And if yes, then you also go to step C, where the decision makers are to perform a balancing exercise and taking into account all the relevant factors. And so this is, I think, really important, because what the court has stated, putting it very simply, is that there must be no material harm caused by the activity. Now, I'll get later on to what this means internationally as well, but it is important that the court has made this decision. And also, importantly, the Supreme Court looked at treaty law and read upholding the Court of Appeal that the decision-making committee must take into account the effects of the proposed mining on existing interests in a manner that recognises and respects the Crown's obligation to give effect to the principles of the treaty, and it therefore followed that tikanga-based customary rights and interests constitute existing interests for the purpose of the legislation. And this is a very clear decision which was made by the Supreme Court. And finally, turning to what is next, as Cindy said, there was an order that the matter be referred to the decision-making committee for reconsideration. One judge, Judge Glazebrook, said that the consent should have been declined by the decision-making committee on the basis of the information they had. And she said there was no point in referring it back for reconsideration. And she said it would put an unwarranted burden on the, or effectively the submitters if the applicants allowed to fill the information gaps. But other members of the Supreme Court ruled differently. So what is next happening is there's a High Court hearing on May 30th for directions on what evidence may be brought, and fundamentally directions sought about the way the decision-making committee will be comprised and so on. And then presumably it will then go back for reconsideration and another hearing by TTR. And I want to close with some observations about the international implications of, in particular, Supreme Court decision. And the first thing is to note, as Justice Glazebrook noted, that under the International Convention for the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, there are really two crucial provisions: the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment, and the obligation to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. And this, as Justice Glazebrook said, is consistent with the bottom line approach that this court took to the purposes of the legislation. And UNCLOS also provides that New Zealand, as a coastal state, must take measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution. And as Justice Glazebrook said, if the environment is materially harmed, it cannot be said to be protected from pollution. And this is consistent with another requirement for international seabed mining, and this being in Article 145 of the Convention, which requires that the International Seabed Authority, which is then tasked with taking measures with respect to the seabed mining and the international seabed area, that the ISA must ensure there's effective protection of the marine environment from harmful effects. So here we see again these words harmful effects coming in. And again, coastal states such as New Zealand must take measures to prevent, reduce and control pollution from seabed mining. And two other issues which arise both in the New Zealand legislation and internationally is that Article 61, the courts have said, is really an effective detailed expression of the precautionary principle that if it's unclear whether effective protection will be achieved, if an application is approved, then the precautionary principle requires that a consent be refused, which is again similar to the New Zealand Article 61 expression. And finally, the baseline, again, Cindy talked about the lack of an adequate baseline by TTR, and it is clear that where there is an inadequate environmental baseline, then granting an application is inconsistent with the need to apply caution and environmental protection, or in the international context, the precautionary principle. So there's a lot to take on board there. I appreciate, as I said in my opening slides, this has been a long and winding road effectively to nowhere, which, as Phil said very clearly, this has been very frustrating for all and very expensive and time consuming. Yeah, I'll pass this back to the organisers and thank you for your time.
Kia ora, Duncan. Thank you for that and all your incredible work on this over the many years. Firstly, just invite anyone who has questions to drop them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to those shortly. But it's an honour to introduce the Honourable Debbie Ngāre-Wapaka of Te Pāti Māori and also Ngāti Ruanui. Debbie has led her people and the people of South Taranaki in this battle on behalf of the rest of us around the country, where this activity would also have rolled out if there had not been a stronghold in South Taranaki defending the waters directly off their shore. So Debbie, welcome and thank you for joining us, taking the time out of a busy day in Parliament. Please go ahead.
Oh, kia ora, and tuatai ngā mihi kia koutou kua tai mai, ka nui ta mihi. Kia koutou mō tō manaaki me tō kaha I tēnei kaupapa. So first of all, thank you to everyone gathered here and appreciate all the strength and support across your various realms and worlds, whether it be legal, lobbyists or whatever, but it's been truly an honour as tangata whenua to be walking and fighting alongside many of you, our tangata tiriti, tangata moana. So I'm going to get straight in, and my huge apologies. The House sat early, but you will be pleased it was about environmental kaupapa, if that gives me some leadway. But I guess the only thing that I would like to add to this from the perspective of mana whenua, and I'm very fortunate to be from Ngāti Ruanui, Ngā Ruahine, Ngā Rauru, all who were part and parcel of this battle alongside KASM, Greenpeace, conservation. And I think, and I was really pleased to hear Duncan say it, that there were some decisions made in the various court cases, but particularly the last one that gives us some relief a little, because it is a really frustrating process. And I'm not going to give all the details. I know that you're aware of the 50 million tonnes of sand from the seabed that they're looking to take for 35 years. One of the hardest things was, as tangata whenua, is trying to have our rights recognised in an environmental space, which was largely scientific and technical. And I'll stay on as long as I can. I'll walk down to the boarding if I can. If you have questions, sorry, I just saw a chat come up. And just to say, from our perspective, we are really you could not get more grassroots than some of us, and our iwi are, I often say, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate analogy, but I've heard our uncles call us the Sicily. I'm from Italy. So we are the real grassroots ones that don't really do court, don't really kick up a lot. We pretty much roll with a lot. We have way too many extractors in our backyard. So for us to take on this fight, we knew that it was going to be very much a David and Goliath kōrero. But if I can sort of give a couple of things from a culture perspective, for us, this isn't just about protecting marine life and protecting everything that's important for our planet and our future. We are made up of the moana, we are made up of tangaroa. So it was really hard in this court case to try and get our cultural point of difference across. And Article 2, and I know that they talk about the principles of the tiriti, but I would invite that there's some research into Article 2 of the tiriti, which tiriti o Waitangi, which acknowledged the rights and interests of tangata whenua before the treaty was signed. So our default setting is that we actually don't understand at times why we had to go to court and prove that we are tangata whenua. And I think that was really hard. From the iwi's perspective, they had settled with government in 2003 and 4, so understood that our rights and interests had been acknowledged by the government. And so to then come up against a process where we had this company, the extractor, TTR, try to engage with us and completely misunderstand, and in fact there was no engagement, it became really, really fraught. But then to also be in a position to try and explain to the government, well, to Ministry for Environment and EPA, that, you know, we had concerns for the protection, the deeper cultural needs for us to be able to survive as a people. The minute that our oceans desecrated, I mean, so are we. So from a Māori perspective, we are made up of predominantly of water, of fluid. When a woman is impregnated, semen comes from, it's predominantly fluid. When we carry our babies, it's fluid. When we rock and we nurse as pregnant wahine, pregnant woman, it's in the rhythm of fluid. So when something as radical as that changes, culturally, spiritually, mentally and physically, we're affected as well. And how do you explain that as Indigenous people in courts, that this isn't just about us and our need to survive and thrive with food, but actually the minute that the modi, the natural flow of something as important, that ocean changes, so do we as a people. So, and I'm sorry that it's a little bit over people's heads, but we, throughout this whole battle, had our cultural concerns ignored, and it was really difficult, I know, for a lot of the lawyers and the technicians to take it a step up. But that is, I think, the battle for a lot of Indigenous peoples around us. So I think if I can, I guess, you know, we filled buses, we did petitions. We were very, very fortunate to have allies such as Phil and Cindy, and we're able to, I guess, bring the grassroots activism to life. But yeah, it has been a real hard battle to be able to have governments and courts respect and understand the needs of Indigenous peoples in these battles. So yes, I'm happy to take a question, absolutely, and be put on track.
Are there any questions that would like to be directed towards Debbie while she's here before she heads back into Parliament?
Well, there was a question, actually, Kath Wallace here. There was a question in the chat, which is from Sean Kavanagh, and he asks everyone who speaks or who can answer it to say, the ecocide initiative, which is one that is to change international law to criminalize environmental destruction by amendment of the Rome Statute at the International criminal court. And in fact, ECO did a webinar on this too. What he's asking is, please discuss your familiarity with this initiative and its relationship to deep sea mining. And then I think you may have other questions as well, but we'll start with that one for Debbie, if you can, Debbie.
I think if I understood the question right, sorry, there was something in the background. I think from our perspective, seabed mining, and if I can't say any more direct than this, is a violation of our kaitiakitanga. And I guess as defenders of the ecosystem, that's as simple as we see it. It affects and it will affect everything that is a part of who we were and who we are. And it must be protected. And I think that is that intangible life force that comes with the tangible. That is our point of difference as Indigenous peoples. And I think that's some of the things that when we were going through this, how do you articulate that? But you know, it is, I don't know if it's answering your questions, but fundamentally that, you know, we use the tiriti, we use everything that we can that's out there as a license to explain how we use our role as kaitiaki. But this activity proposes to upset that more than anything we've ever known.
Thank you very much. And that indeed is, I think, ECO's view as well. And I see that Duncan Curry, invaluable contributor and lawyer, international lawyer, is doing so much at the Mahi internationally. He has put in a comment about the sort of formal definition of ecocide, and that I think is very helpful to everyone. I'm just having trouble opening the other Q&A because it's for some reason not opening up. But are there other questions?
Kath, I wonder
I can
if we
just say that decision-making committee, and this is a problem and something that's going to probably be addressed on the 30th, the decision-making committee struggled to put weight on our culture values. One, they weren't equipped to be able to do it. But our view is that these are things that that have to have just as much weight as everything else that they assess, whether economic values or environmental. You know, this is, and I think that is where we really fell out. And our belief has always been from day one, it should never have gotten past the EPA. This and you know, the application was incomplete from the very beginning. Should never ever have gotten to the stage it got to.
Thank you, and I think it's very interesting that we now have all these court cases. Phil, you have a question, and I think Barry was also wanting to intervene, so I'll take Barry first. I
was just going to say, kia ora, Debbie, just to note that we've got some people on this webinar who are joining us from the Pacific and also from Africa, who have you know, got similar concerns in regard to deep sea mining, and I'm sure will be interested in how Ngāti Rūnui and the local iwi and nationally have engaged on this issue. So I think I just thought I'd tell you that and move on. Unless you want to add anything more, Debbie, I'll pass on to Phil.
No, that's great. And look, I just want to say out there to everyone, you know, be strong, be bold, don't settle. And I know after 8-9 years of this, we saw a lot of our elderly that started this battle pass away. In fact, this is the very reason why I'm in Parliament. And you know, we just have to stay strong and believe in what we're here to do, because we don't get a second chance at this. There's no other ocean. And I know I'm singing to the choir, but everything we're doing really does matter. And I ask that you stay strong and stay intentional.
Can I just intervene and as well as just put Phil on hold and Duncan, because there is an interesting question or comment about Namibia's fight which has been fighting marine phosphate mining. Are you having to go now, Debbie?
I'm going to take myself off the camera as I move down through security. Yeah, but I'm still
Okay.
listening. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
there is a comment about Namibia, and that is in the Q&A.
My brother.
And that they are looking at a proposal, some EIA for 2 EIAs for a massive project of 5 million tonnes per year. So have a look at that as well. Now, Phil, your turn.
Thanks, Kath. Deb, if you're still there and you have a moment to respond, I just wondered if you could maybe describe and comment on what I think was a groundbreaking aspect of the Supreme Court decision around tikanga in Koichakitanga.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think, and I do implore that others that are going for this battle dare to go down the other part of the science and don't super guess our own Indigenous science. The weight of where that sits now in court. There is definitely more, particularly from even when we started 8-9 years ago, there is more of a leaning to understand what our cultural science and values are in a legislative sense, actually in a legal sense too. So I think we were able to call on the treaty, which is what we have in Aotearoa, but I also think that every Indigenous culture has something that it can call on to explain how we've protected and kept our planet going for the thousands of years that we have. So I think that was really, and again, we were desperate and we sort of didn't think there'd be much weight put to it, but there was, and I do think that everyone's got that somewhere in their own culture.
Kia ora, Debbie. Duncan's got his hand up. So Duncan?
I'm muted. Good. You can hear me. Yeah, thank you for that. Just to respond to a few of the excellent questions in the chat. Firstly, on Namibia, yeah, I'm familiar with parts of this, and this actually does illustrate one of the points I was making about the need for a fully transparent process with public participation, because as I understand it, in Namibia, the environmental impact statement is only available for viewing physically in some building, which means that if you can't get yourself to Windhoek or whatever, then you're unable to make any comments at all on the EIS, and clearly that does not satisfy any requirements of transparency and public participation. And yeah, that is a really important fight that you're fighting there in Namibia. The question by Sue about economic matters, what the Supreme Court actually really found was that the decision-making committee had, contrary to the finding of the Court of Appeal below, looked at economic costs as well as benefits. And frankly, it's a difficult argument to understand, because if you read the decision, they really looked at the economic benefits and hardly at all on the economic costs at all, and they certainly didn't undertake any cost-benefit analysis, which our economists said is absolutely essential. So this is an issue, absolutely, because I think clearly if you're going to be assessing economic matters, then you must assess the economic costs, including the cost of the marine environment, as well as the any economic benefits, and take a hard look at those economic benefits, because there have been some very, very overblown claims both to economic benefits and to jobs, which I think the evidence didn't bear out in the applications to date. And just briefly talk also about the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, developing a fund for remediation. I mean, the problem there, of course, is that seabed mining cannot be remediated. The whole vexed question of the liability fund under the International Seabed Authority and the so-called sustainability fund is very much ongoing. And for example, in the recent meeting we had in the International Seabed Authority just in March of this year, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition had been suggesting for a long time that there needs to be a valuation of in this case, the deep sea or the sea floor, as well as ecosystem services and the natural capital involved in that. And the member states of the Seabed Authority actually did decide to do that, although that's up for further discussion in July. So this is a live issue. And one final, sorry, I did make an observation in the chat about ecocide. I don't want to get into issues of definition, but other than to say that we do know from the current knowledge that the effects of seabed mining will be effectively irreversible. Disturbance of the seafloor many decades ago, or caused many decades ago, is still there, almost unchanged. As I said before, we know, for example, from some of the from the evidence in the Chatham Rock phosphate case, that the substrate which the life forms in the seafloor in the benthic area rely on would be destroyed, and as well as the ongoing effects of the plume. And let's bear in mind, in the New Zealand cases, the applications would have been for 30-35 years, and in the international context, they'd be for 30 years with automatic 10-year rights of renewal. So you're talking about multi-decades. So in many respects, you almost are talking about talking about very long timeframes. And so that's why I think there's a strong argument. You could say that, yes, this kinds of seabed mining would fall within the definitions of ecocide. And finally, I do want to acknowledge Debbie's comment about tikanga, and to say that there's a growing awareness internationally of the importance of traditional knowledge in the marine biodiversity discussions that are going on and negotiations that are going on in New York at the moment for a new agreement on the conservation of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. There's a real growing awareness and I would say a consensus at the moment that traditional knowledge does need to be included as well as scientific knowledge. And likewise, even in the International Seabed Authority, there's been discussion on the floor about the importance of including traditional knowledge. So thank you for that, and back to the organisers.
Kia ora, Duncan. Can I one question? I don't know if Debbie's could do this, but an opportunity, which is the private members bill that has been put forward by Te Pāti Māori.
Yes, I know, we keep like going down there and wishing the biscuit tin to come out and jump out of my members bill. So if you got any like superpowers, now would be the time. So that was one of the first things we did, and we literally go down there and just hope it's been picked out, but it hasn't. So we're having a discussion on what we do if we change it a bit or rethink that. So any advice you have, I'm really lucky that I've got a great relationship with our Green Party, and one of our chief of staff is Jack McDonald, who's a well-known policy developer in the environmental space as well. So we'll be thinking of a plan B if we have to. I'm sorry, and I'm just getting ready to board. It's just such an honour, and I'm sorry that I can't give this the attention that it really needed from me today, but I hope that helps. And I'm grateful for you all.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And I just want to say that there will be another webinar which will have much more focus on the Pacific and international. Now, do get your flight, and thanks so much.
Sure, thanks.
No, I think we'll move back to the rest of the webinar, which we changed that all around because of Debbie not being able to get into the webinar earlier. And we'll go back to James, who will be introduced by Hill, and then we will have the rest of the Q&A and discussion if there aren't questions as such. So Phil, if you could introduce James, thanks.
Kia ora, Kath, and yes, I'd like to welcome James Heater of Greenpeace Aotearoa, who's heading up the Greenpeace's domestic seabed mining campaign, as well as I think he's co-lead of the international campaign upon that Greenpeace is embarking on. So thank you, James, for joining us.
Kia ora Phil and kia ora tātou. Ki te matua te tama te wairua tapu me ngā nehi pono me te maungai hei tautoko mai ai nei a ki nei ai. Ko tūta moe te maunga, ko kaihu te awa, ko māhuhu ki te rangi te waka, ko taita te marae, ko mai tahi te urupā, ko Ngāti Torihina tōku hapu, ko Ngāti Whātua tōku iwi, no te tai tokeroa hau, ko Uku Toia tōku tūranga waiwai, ko James Heater tōku ingoa. So yeah, my name is James. I am the seabed mining campaigner for Greenpeace Aotearoa and co-lead on the global campaign against deep sea mining for Greenpeace internationally. And yeah, what I really wanted to talk about, because we've heard a lot about the issue itself of deep sea mining and why it's going to be really destructive and a dangerous industry for the whole world. But what I guess a lot of people will be asking themselves is, what can we do to stop this and what actions can we take? And there's a wide range. So as an organisation, Greenpeace Aotearoa are doing work here in Aotearoa to call on the government to take action, to take decisive action and ban seabed mining, so that battles like this aren't just left up to civil society and iwi and hapu to fight constantly to protect the ocean that we all love. And we are also supporting grassroots activism, both here in Aotearoa and around the Pacific. We're working with a specific focus on the countries of the Cook Islands and Papua New Guinea, but obviously covering the whole Pacific as well. And on that, we're working on these legal challenges that you've heard a bit about, including supporting the case against Trans-Tasman Resources through Duncan Curry. And also looking at other potential legal challenges around the Pacific as well to deep sea mining. One of the things that I'm most proud of that we've done as Greenpeace is working with young Pacific activists to stand together and both here in Aotearoa and around the Pacific region, and doing that through creative activism, doing that through art and telling stories and sharing their perspective and opinion on the issue, and really strongly advocating for the protection of the oceans. But you know, what can you do on an individual level? Really, one thing that I always go back to is have a conversation. Don't just share a link, don't just share a post, don't just like something, don't just sign a petition, but have a conversation, whether that be with someone you trust and care for, whether it's a whānau member or a friend. Have that conversation and get deep into it. You know, think about the issue on a wider perspective. How does it affect you? How does it affect your people, your family, your friends? And talk about what you can do together. Because the actions can range from as small as having a conversation and signing a petition to as large as starting your own campaign around the issue and speaking up widely on it. You don't need to have any particular background or anything in this. Just speaking, giving your opinion and sharing your call for people to be aware of this issue and to stand up against it. That, I think, will give us the biggest amount of momentum to stop this industry before it starts. Yeah, so that's just a bit on what we're doing, what you can do. But I would like to end just by saying that we've got a petition out on our website to ban seabed mining in Aotearoa, and we're calling really strongly on the New Zealand government to take that action, banning this destructive process in our waters, and then we want to ask them also to support the global calls for a moratorium as well, because it's an issue that not only we as Aotearoa are facing, but countries all around the world, as we've seen with the Pacific and comments in the chat about other deep sea mining activities happening around the world. So we really all have to take a moment out of our day to speak out against this industry. And it's not very difficult, but it does require some energy. So yeah, I think we should all be dedicating some time and energy toward that. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Thank you so much. That's That's great. And I hope those of you who are not locals are managing to get the sense of what is being said in Maori. Well, I hope everyone does actually. But now I just do want to take us back perhaps to the discussion we were having before about the nature of ecocide and whether this applies in this situation. And we have had some discussion. So anyone who hasn't commented on that, any of the speakers might like to do that. And we also have a question from Catherine Chung in Taranaki, and that is, we'll come to that next, but do any of the speakers want to speak to ecocide?
Kath, there's also a comment in the chat, which is probably worth responding to as well.
Yes, I noticed that. That's the one from, well, there's one from David Russell, which I've sort of given the question.
Sorry, there's a comment from Tui Shortland, which is probably
okay,
responding
okay.
to. Thanks.
Well, we'll go to ecocide. Does anyone want to address that?
I'll just say a quick response. The activity, the West Coast TTR black sand mining proposal is one thing, and you know, recovery times were indeterminable in that case as far as the experts were concerned. But when you're looking at deep sea ecosystems like the Chatham Rise, like the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the middle of the Pacific, like the deep ocean areas in the Cook Islands, nodule mining, those ecosystems are incredibly fragile, slow to evolve, and very slow to recover. And the science has said that removing the nodules themselves provide the habitat for the organisms that exist there to, you know, provide niches and space for them to exist. And removal of the nodules is removal of the habitat, and recovery is beyond human timescales. So, you know, how that fits in with the idea of ecocide, permanent you know, destruction or removal of ecosystems is of habitat. I think that fits in the conversation somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, anyone else on the speaking panel? Okay, let's then go to Catherine.
Kath, we've got Duncan has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I can only see some of the participants. My apologies. Duncan, go.
Thanks. I was just going to speak to Catherine's question about can you hear that? Yep. Speak to Catherine's question, and I think that what I'd say in response to that question, Catherine, about the link between the need for renewable energy and deep sea mining is that it's been a false narrative, frankly, by the deep sea mining industry that deep sea minerals are needed for the renewables transition. And the reality is that, firstly, I say that there's simply no evidence, and it's simply not sustainable to argue that there are not enough minerals on Earth as opposed to the deep sea to fund or to power the renewables revolution. And the DSCC has got some talking points on its website that go into the details of that. But the other point is that ultimately what the proponents of deep sea mining are arguing is that it's better to go to the deep sea than it is to mine on land. And the reality, of course, is it's not either or. If there was deep sea mining to begin, then you'd end up with both. You'd be both mining the deep sea and carry on mining on land. That's the first point. And the second point is that it is simply not possible, even that aside, to draw a comparison between the damage that would be caused through deep sea mining and the damage that would be caused by terrestrial mining, because they're totally different, and we don't know the damage that will be caused by seabed mining yet. We simply don't have enough scientific information about the baselines, nor do we have enough information about the mining that would be carried out, but we do know that the damage would be severe and long-lasting and effectively irreversible. And the last thing I want to say is that argument also fails to take on board the growing awareness that what we need is a circular economy, a transitional economy. It's no longer acceptable in this day and age to have the argument that, oh, well, you know, we need X amount of metals for this widget, and therefore we're going to have to engage in new industrial activity to find metals for that. And instead, we need to find sustainable solutions. We need to look long and hard about the kinds of technologies that the world needs. And I think most of all, be aware that we're in the middle of both a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis, that both of these need to be addressed together. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else wanting to address that issue of the argument that says, as we have to have seabed mining for clean tech? And I think Duncan has given us a very good one, but we need more. We need other responses, I think, from you, if you can. Otherwise, we'll move on to a question from Colleen Phillip, and then Susan Reid has a comment as well. Thank you. Go, James.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, we are fighting this narrative that the industry is propagating. Basically, they are in this for one reason and one reason only, and that's to fill their pockets, to profit off of this industry, and they will do anything possible to make people believe that this is the right pathway to go down. But we have to be really steadfast, and just going back to what Fire Debbie said earlier, we have to be steadfast and fearless and stand against this narrative, because it's simply not accurate. You know, we already extract so much from this planet, and it's simply an excuse for these companies to make money. And we just have to not put up with that. We have to preserve the environment. We have to protect the environment that we have responsibility to care for the future generations that come ahead of us. And you know, it's a tough argument to respond to, because you don't really want to give it time. You don't want to give it time and energy, but it's simply false. And we need to move away from that and move to a circular economy where we respect all of the resources that we extract from this planet and have already extracted, and we reuse them as much as humanly possible. Just my 2 cents on that. Kia ora.
Thank you so much. I might now move to Cindy, who is going to read out a question that I, for some reason, haven't been able to see. So Cindy, thanks very much, Jen.
The question's from Susan Reid. She said it might be a question for Duncan. She says, so the Supreme Court determined that the mining applicants' commitment to provide economic compensation for remediating damaged marine environment is no reason to grant them a consent to dump waste, waters, etc. back into the ocean. Is this at odds with the ISA's economization of harm, i.e. the international...
Cindy, sorry, Susan has said in the chat that Duncan has already answered her question. So,
okay.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll go to Colleen's question then, and I can help answer that. How can we take the load off civil society? Is having an oceans minister going to make a difference, and what might? I mean, it is of great concern to us, really, that there's only a couple of seabed mining companies who want to seabed mine in New Zealand. We don't really understand why the government is so reluctant to ban it. The oceans minister, David Parker, has said that he doesn't like banning things, but I mean, we know they've banned all sorts of things like conversion therapy, for example. So, we really think this is an opportunity for the government here to just draw a line under this and ban seabed mining. I mean, we have taken this through so many, 3 huge applications to the EPA, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court. And basically the answer is that it's going to cause too much damage. So, I think that this should be seen as an opportunity for the government to actually be seen to be protecting the oceans. And also we can then take this example. We're really calling on the New Zealand government to take this example internationally and tell everybody, all the other countries, about the experience that we've had, which is unique. There's been no other seabed mining application process like we've had in New Zealand, such a thorough process. And it's sort of beyond us. So, this is why we're appealing to the Prime Minister. We think it's a win for the government. We know that people are against seabed mining. There's there were so few submissions in support of these applications that I think it's quite troubling. But it's not just civil society. Actually, we're in the rather strange position of being working alongside tallies and sea lords, and Te Aukai Moana, and the fishing industry is dead against this for reasons that we probably don't really want to go into, because we don't want to go into the overfishing and all of that issue. But there's vested interests who actually want to stop seabed mining so they can carry on fishing. But so it is beyond us. So we're really pushing to, we're going to hand in these petitions soon, and want to make a big noise about it. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about that. I'm sure other people have got answers to that question as well.
Thank you. We'll keep those answers very short, because actually Tui Shortland made a comment a while ago, and there's also a question from Arlo. So we want to try and get all those questions dealt with. Tui, you have put a comment. Do you want to sort of add anything to that, or is that actually a question? I'm finding some questions in the chat and some in Q&A.
Duncan and Phil have got their hands up, but
so sorry, I can't see.
Tui's question was about impact assessment must include cultural assessments, and seabed mining has wider impacts through surrounding marine ecosystems where we see changes in our traditional marine areas. The BBNJ, that's the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, which is the UN process developing an oceans treaty, has a growing awareness, and the IPBES, which is the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is similar to the UN Framework Convention, the IPCC in the ecosystem space, doesn't publish draft reports without including Indigenous people. So that's quite a useful comment. And I don't know, people might want, panelists may want to respond. So Phil.
It is a good comment from Tui. I don't have a response specifically to that, but just following on from what Cindy was sharing before, I think what's relevant here is that the commercial interest is gone, and for the current government to ban this activity, there are virtually no losers. There's Trans-Tasman Resources, which has failed to gain consent twice, and there's Chatham Rock Phosphate, who's got a permit sitting, and it's been sitting since 2015, and they're not in a position to reapply. And then when there was in 2012 dozens and dozens of permits held by several companies, there are now only 5 permit areas left in all of our waters. So the commercial interest is gone. There are no losers. It's time to ban it. I also just want to sort of say that in the international context, New Zealand, because we are so far ahead of the world on this, we are the first ones to look at this. We are our story is a cautionary forerunner to what's playing out on the global stage now, both within some countries' jurisdictions, say Cook Islands. The Cook Islands has only just in the last few months issued exploration licenses. When we started these processes with Trans-Tasman Resources, it was exploration licenses. and the exploitation applications came in 2013, 2014, 2016.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry, I'm just going to have to cut you off there because there's quite a lot more questions, and there's also a question by or something from Duncan. Duncan, you're next, and then we'll try and pick up Catherine Chong's question about BB&J and ISA, and also Lyndon Devantier has a question. So thank you.
I'm just going to quickly respond to two, not comments, one by Margaret about noise, and you're absolutely right, Margaret, one of the big issues in both cases was the effect on marine mammals, and our experts made it very clear that you need a full marine mammal research proposed plan, which will take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to really look at the patterns and find out exactly which marine mammals are in the area. Different marine mammals or different species have different responses to different frequencies, for example. And the other problem is we don't even know the frequencies or the amount of noise that will be put out. What we do know, and we heard this in the Chatham Rise case, that for example, they're proposing to have I think it was a 10 or 12 megawatt engine on the seafloor, which would put out a lot of noise. That's equivalent of a small ship. So noise is absolutely a big issue, which does need to be addressed, and is a reason that seabed mining shouldn't be carried out. And to respond briefly to Marilyn's point about liability, and that's a good point, and a point which has been coming up recently, Marilyn, and Odyssey, for example, a mining company that applied for a consent in Mexico is being sued for $3.5 billion for not giving an exploitation consent to Odyssey. And what I would say is that this is a very good reason for governments to steer clear of seabed mining. Papua New Guinea has already lost $120 million by dabbling in seabed mining in the Solwara 1 application. And yeah, the further along states go along the exploration route, closer to granting exploitation permits, the more likely there are that that they will find themselves, depending on many legal issues such as international trade agreements and local forum situations and so on. But the simple point I would make is that the further along you go to issuing permits, the more likely you are that companies will indeed put their hand up and say, we demand compensations. That's a very good reason to have a ban sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we now go to Arlo's question, which was about the argument for cobalt needed for batteries, and that being a diversion. And I think Barry mentioned that there's a lot of new tech, new ideas and tech going into new kinds of batteries. So can we have a quickie on that, please?
Just before Barry, I think the reason he asked the question is to make one observation is that cobalt, because its properties and high temperatures and so on, is used in rocket engines, jet engines, and so on. So it's more along the lines that James was saying, that it is absolutely a false narrative being propounded by the companies that cobalt is needed, as well as the point that because cobalt is used for other industrial and military activities. And the other point, of course, is that that cobalt is being taken out of lithium batteries by a number of companies at the moment, including the well, Tesla's looking at doing this, but as well as China's largest electrical vehicle manufacturer. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, there's a question from Lyndon Devantier, and we're perilously close to the end of this, so I think we might have to take this as the last question.
Yeah,
and do make
I think
sure
it'll have to be Kath, it'll have to be the last question, I think.
Yeah, actually, it's not so much a question as a comment, and there's a lot of very interesting comments in this, and a note from the Greens that they're allies, which we do know, and they'll be on the next webinar. But Lyndon Devantier says, re Ecoside, that the draft legal definition does not provide examples, but acknowledging the strong case here made that deep sea mining is a form of ecocide. Any comment on that? Duncan seems to have frozen. I think at this point, Barry, I'll hand over to Phil and then to you, Barry. Phil, you had a last word to make.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry. Yeah, I guess just winding this discussion up, I guess. Thank you everyone for joining. The next webinar that's being planned by ECO and all of us here co-hosting is another seabed mining webinar, but looking at the international and Pacific context. And we hope to have voices coming in from the Pacific to discuss what's going on there and how Pacific peoples are feeling about this. And our observation through engagement with them over the last few years is that they are as strongly opposed to the notion of strip mining vast areas of the seafloor, that they don't like the idea. It goes against everything that they believe in. So that we aim to do that mid-June, early June, and dates to be confirmed, but we very much appreciate people tuning up for that. Thank you again to ECO for pulling this discussion together.
Kia ora,
Thanks,
Phil.
Bale, over to you.
And Kia ora, thanks everyone for attending. We certainly have had people from the four winds and all around the planet at this meeting, at this webinar. And I'd like to thank everyone who have attended and also thank all the speakers, and just got a closing karakia to end, and I'll make some final words. So, kia tau, kia tatou katoa, te ao, te aroha, me te maratau, te he Māori ora.
Te he ora.
He kono mai, mena mihi nui kia koutou ki pai te rā. Thanks.
Ngā mihi, Barry.
Kia ora.
Well, this is closing. This is now closed, and we'll leave it on a little bit longer, I think, Aisha, if we may, so that people can copy down links or whatever. And let's just also note Seaborn Rust's comment about all the biologists and taxonomists and other people. Kia ora all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Barry. Phil. Beautiful, all of you. Cindy.
Aisha. And
Aisha,
James.
Aisha.
And yourself.
Nice. Anytime. And I meant what I said earlier about putting our nose to the grindstone and seeing if we can't rustle up a bit of financial support. That's a campaign in itself. The signatures, the signature is not that delicious. It's helpful, but it doesn't keep us nourished, really. So happy to come into that conversation offline as required. I think it's really worthwhile having a go, especially given what you have achieved.
Thanks, Scott.
Right,
And
on to the boat show.
Okay.
Kia ora, Scott.
Special.
Kia ora, everyone.
Time for lunch. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Great job, everyone. Thank you very much.
See. Thanks, Aisha.
Thank you, Aisha. Well done. Great coordinating.